Coming up in this week's episode of TechSNAP, how a man-in-the-browser attack could be exposing airport VPNs, how RuggedCom has once again messed up the fundamentals of security, and Adobe's big update. Plus, in our Q&A section, we'll answer questions like running Linux in a FreeBSD Jail, the basics of virtualization networking, and a lot more. All that and a ton of more stuff in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This is episode 72, and we streamed it live on August 23rd, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, which is incredible. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the teacher, the admin, and the tech, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody.
Hey, man, welcome to episode 72. We got a really big show. And I got to say, I haven't said that for a little while, but this is a big show.
Yeah, yes.
Got a lot to cover. And
I got up early to make sure it was a big show.
Well, let's be honest, too. One of the other reasons you got up early is because you got some new toys, like 13 new toys, right? Am I getting that number
18.
right? 18. 18
Yes.
3 terabyte hard drives. 3
Yes.
terabytes, 18 of them.
Yep.
What
Plus-
are you doing with that?
Plus, I ordered 12 packs of 24 gigabytes of RAM. Although only 9 of them shipped. The other 3 are...
So what's that grand total there? What's the quick math on the grand total?
Like 288 gigabytes, I think.
Of RAM?
Yeah.
What are you doing with all that, Alan? What are you doing?
Well, you remember we did the ZFS build quite a while ago? I guess it was like January or whatever?
Yeah.
Or December even?
Yeah.
I forget.
Yeah.
Well, we've since built 4 machines like that, although 3 of the 4 are just one use, so they only hold a couple of hard drives. But basically, we built, dual processor, quad cores with 48 gigs of RAM and all that nice stuff. Basically, each of those is getting upgraded from 48 to 96 gigabytes of RAM. So that will fill all 12 RAM slots with 8 gigabyte modules.
Oh, why so much memory? Why so much RAM?
We use a lot of RAM.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
We just do. So that'll, databases and stuff work better if they can keep almost everything in RAM. So you have nice 120 gig SSDs for the databases, but if the whole database doesn't fit in RAM, then it could be faster. And so more RAM equals faster database.
Yeah.
So 3 of the machines basically don't have any fancy file system at all. They're just little hard drive and some SSDs for the data. They're just database servers. So they're all getting upgraded to have 96 gigabytes of RAM instead of 48. One of the 4 newer ones is basically identical to the ZFS server, except for without the separate disk controller.
Mm-hmm.
That one is getting 8 of the 18 new hard drives and also getting upgraded to 96 gigabytes of RAM.
Ooh.
And that will basically be a second ZFS file server. And it'll technically actually have a bigger array because it'll be 3 terabyte drives instead of 2 terabyte drives. That one. And then our original ZFS server, it has 18 RAM slots.
Jeez.
So we're going to fill all of those with 8 gigabyte modules. So it'll have 144 gigabytes of RAM.
Oh my god.
And yes, that's registered ECC 133 megahertz RAM. So not low-end RAM.
Alan is responding to the jblive.tv chat room. If you'd like to watch the show live at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is 4 p.m. Eastern, over at jblive.tv, and you can join our chat room, or over at jblive.info for the audio stream. So, Alan, when are you putting all of this together?
Shortly.
Wow.
I don't have an exact date yet, but...
This is fun. So the last time you did this big server build project, I was at a tough spot where I really needed to upgrade my server, but with the cost of hard drives from the Thailand floods, there was just no way I was going to jump in. Now, in the next few weeks, I'll be building a new server, too. I got one of those little FreeNAS mini boxes from IX Systems. Should be shipping on the 31st of August, I believe.
Nice.
So I'll get it, and once I get it in here and I'll get it all set up, I'll give you guys a little review of it. And Alan, one of the things maybe I could get your help on, since I'm not really a FreeBSD guru, is a good way to benchmark like the read-write throughput of the drives and things like that once I get it all set up.
Almost any utility you'd have for Linux is available on BSD as well. There's a category in the ports tree called benchmarks that'll have, like all your Linux disk benchmark utilities. Plus, if you just want sequential read and write, you can just use DD or whatever.
My setup is nowhere as fancy as yours, though. I mean, that's crazy, Alan. That's
well, yeah,
a ton of
ZFS with 144 gigs of RAM is going to be very nice.
Well, we have got a heck of a show to get into today. So I'll just give a quick plug. We do have our affiliate links at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com and also extensions for your local web browser or wherever you happen to do your browsing. And if you grab those, they support the show when you're shopping and helps us keep these shows going. 72 in a row. Alan, should we jump into our first news story? All right. This one got my attention. It was actually sent in by listener Ted, I believe, right? Is that what his name?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, Ted. And he put us on to something that hasn't really percolated into the mainstream news yet, but probably over the next few weeks you'll probably be hearing more about it, I would assume. So what's going on?
So there's been basically a man-in-the-browser attack, which is basically where a piece of malware gets into your browser as like a plugin, and then once it's done that, it can act as things like a keylogger, but also because it's part of the browser, it can potentially see stuff you're submitting over SSL before it gets encrypted.
Right,
like
sure.
It grab the contents of forms when you hit a submit button before it actually gets submitted.
Like a little JavaScript overlay kind of thing? Or it just captures?
Well, it's a browser plugin, so it can get...
Oh, actually in the browser. Okay,
yes,
I'm following you.
That's why it's called a man-in-the-browser attack.
Man in the browser.
So it's like a man in the middle, except for it lives in your browser, so it actually has the ability to circumvent some protection systems. Like, right, for example... SSL or TLS is designed to prevent a man in the middle from being able to see what your username and password when you submit them over SSL. But if the man's in your browser, it sees it before it gets encrypted.
Sure.
And so they get your username and password for the site. Well, someone's specifically targeted employees of an airport with this man in the browser attack and is trying to gain credentials for their VPN.
That's spooky.
Yes. So it appears to be a highly targeted attack where some airport employees have had their machines infected with a man-in-the-browser malware so that when they try to log into the airport's VPN, it could capture their credentials. Now, the airport has a two-factor authentication system, but it has two modes.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
One of which is not as secure. So basically, the man-in-the-browser malware allowed an attacker to use form grabbing, which is basically grabbing the contents of the form before they get encrypted, and screen capturing to steal the airport employees' login credentials for the VPN.
Oh.
So what the attack does is it compromises the single-channel mode of the airport's two-factor authentication system. So with that mode, what happens is when you try to log in, you are presented with an image of some kind from the website.
Right.
That they don't give very much detail on it, but apparently you use that image to somehow like decoder ring your password into a temporary code.
Yeah, I've used some sort of login service that's done this before, and yeah, and it's you pick an image like when you're signing up, and it's a series of secret images that it might ask you about. It displays like a bunch of different secret images, and you pick the right one, and then it's somehow linked to it.
Like no, this one's different though. Like you use your password plus the image and somehow come up with a number.
Oh, okay.
That only works the one time because the next time the image is different.
Oh, okay.
So it's some kind of like decoder ring type puzzle, right?
That sounds
fun.
Like
if the first letter of your password is this, then the number becomes this or whatever. I'm not sure how it works. They don't give very much detail in the article.
Okay.
But anyway, because the man in the browser is able to capture that image along with what you answer to it, by capturing a number of those, the attacker is able to figure out what your original password is, even though you never typed it. Because of just this simple, decoder ring type system. Now, the second mode is called two-channel mode, where the second factor comes over a different channel. In this case, an SMS message or a mobile application. Okay. Right, your typical two-factor type setup. Whereas when you're doing two factors and both factors are on the computer, they're both susceptible to the same vulnerability, basically.
Right.
And so this one-channel two-factor doesn't actually accomplish anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you need to have it on a separate device.
Most two-factor authentication systems are based on your password and then something that's not your password.
Right.
But if this system is just using your password to come up with a one-time number, it's still based on your password. So if they have your password, then they get this one-time number.
That's not two factors. That's 1.5 factor.
Basically. And so, yeah, it doesn't work very well. We don't have very much detail. I looked all over trying to get some, like a screenshot of what this thing looks like, but there's nothing like that.
Because it's not a good idea, so nobody's doing it.
Right, except for whoever sold this airport their system.
Right.
Yeah, so, but apparently most of the employees aren't using the full 2-channel mode.
Okay.
Because, they'd have to use their cell phone or whatever.
Yeah, I guess that would be inconvenient.
I suppose. It's also unclear what type of VPN they were using, because I don't know what VPN you use, but I've never seen one where you have to log into it with your web browser.
Oh.
Normally, you would have to connect to a VPN before you could use your web browser.
The quote-unquote SSL VPN where like you go into Internet Explorer and you log in through the web browser and it loads like an ActiveX control, which then starts a VPN, that kind of thing. Have you seen those?
Maybe. No, I've never seen anything like that. Because normally, like, a VPN is like layer 2 or layer 3, whereas your browser is layer 7.
Right.
And so basically, you'd have to connect to the VPN first before you can log in.
Yeah, it sucks.
And how do you log in before you connect to a VPN?
Well, they're probably using like one of those web-based portal ones, I bet. And those suck.
Yeah. Well, if it relies on ActiveX, it's just a bad idea. But
well, that's just an example, but yeah, I know.
But how else could it work, though? Because normally you'd have to connect to the VPN before you log in.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So unless it's like, the VPN lets anybody connect and then has a captive portal, but that seems like a horrible idea too.
Yeah.
So again, no details, but it seems really fishy.
So, Tweakin' for Last mentions in the IRC is Juniper VPNs, which I've actually used Juniper VPNs that don't do it this way. They have a standard app too, but this, like, he has an example of where you log into the web page and it launches a Java app, which then in the background establishes a VPN connection. It's supposedly supposed to be easier for the end user, right? Because it's theoretically easier to administer that username and password for that website. So, like, if they forget it and stuff,
it's easier if the users don't have to download an app ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah,
right? That was always a big complaint with the Cisco one, is you have to have the Cisco VPN app on your computer before you can connect.
And if it's whenever the CEO goes somewhere, he never thinks to tell you ahead of time, so he lands there and he calls you up at 7 p.m. after he's just gotten into his hotel room and hooked up to the internet, and he just wants to get online.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And trading security for ease of use is not always a good idea. Anyway, so it's not known what the attackers were actually after with access to this VPN. But theoretically, with access to the internal airport network, they could gain information on employees there in order to try to compromise people in some way. Threaten their families or whatever, who knows. Information on the hiring process so that they could get their own people hired at the airport. If you're trying to smuggle something through an airport, having people that work at the airport on your side with maybe like access cards.
It starts to become a narrow list of people who'd want to do that, though.
Yeah. The ability to flag certain luggage, cargo, or persons so that they're not subjected to normal security screening.
That'd be interesting.
Or something, right? So it seems like it might be drug dealers trying to smuggle things through airports.
I'm sure drug dealers get them very high tech.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So we don't know what they're actually trying to do.
Yeah.
But it seems that basically using malware that's normally reserved for attacking bank accounts to actually attack an airport.
It makes sense. It could be applicable. It's just whatever field you want to focus on.
Yep.
Huh. All right, Alan. Well, any other thoughts on that one?
No, just that it's pretty scary and that people need to use better VPNs.
Yeah, it's been a kind of a common thread recently.
Yep.
Now, should we move on to this Adobe fixing with their latest August patch round that they call it or something like that?
Well, they just did one a week ago, so this is like an out-of-band emergency update.
Oh, really? Okay, tell me about this.
So Adobe has released Flash 11.4, which fixes at least 6 critical vulnerabilities plus some others. They've also issued an update for the Adobe Air platform and SDK. So this Flash update hits every platform. That's Windows, Mac, Linux, Android 2 and 3, and the separate version for Android 4. And 5 of the 6 vulnerabilities get a CVE score of 10 out of 10. Jeez. Meaning they are like critical importance.
Wow.
So 4 of the vulnerabilities are memory corruption vulnerabilities that could lead to code execution. So that means somebody could, with a malicious Flash file on a website or attached to a file, or we've seen it in PDF files or Excel documents as well.
Yep.
Cause you to run some specially crafted Flash file that will run arbitrary code on your computer and, for example, load malware or whatever. The scary one for this is if one of these managed to get on an ad network.
Right.
And
that's always the
it would drive by download a virus on everybody who sees an ad on this ad network. And there are some ad networks that are completely automated, right? And they might pull it down after a bunch of people got infected, but they don't check every Flash ad for viruses before it goes out.
Or a Juarez site, or a
hard to do.
torrent site, or a
right. But like for example, torrent sites, or anywhere where you see dating ads.
Yeah,
those type of the networks, the places that publish from those type of ad networks are very susceptible to this.
Yeah.
And but if you see like those ads for like whitening your teeth with like miracle cures and stuff, basically anywhere you see really low quality ads, those are very, very susceptible to one of these attacks.
Now, did you hear about the related story? We talked about this on the Linux Action Show, that Google came out and said Linux users should just stop using Acrobat Reader altogether. Adobe is not addressing the problems in these, so just scratch it.
Yeah, right. In that case, Google was basically they found 60 bugs in the way that Google handles PDF files, and for Chrome, and they decided, well, let's try this list against Adobe, and found that they were also susceptible to most of them.
Right.
They reported them to Adobe. Adobe mixed a couple of them, but hasn't. And it looks like they fixed most of them on Windows and Mac.
If you want people
interested in Linux,
if you want people to build around your product, to use your formats and your delivery technologies, then it's your responsibility as a platform, quote unquote, builder to fix this crap. It is a responsibility that you take on when you build these kind of products.
Yep.
It's
Whereas
shameful.
I think the fact that they offer Adobe Reader for Linux was just to satisfy some bigger corporate customers that wanted people to be able to open the PDF files.
Yeah.
But they really need to get on top of these updates.
Seriously.
But in this case, the Linux updated Flash player came out the same day as the Windows one.
Oh, good.
So, although on their site they list the criticality for Windows as a 1, meaning highest.
Yeah.
Mac a 2, and Linux and Android a 3. But that may be more to do with just where it's being exploited than how exploitable it is.
That's Adobe's critical rating.
Right. Whereas CVE gave everything one of the memory corruption ones a 10 out of 10 because they don't require any authentication to be able to attack. They're trivial to do, and they're massive vulnerabilities.
Widely deployed, too, which is, well, jeez.
Then the fifth flaw is an integer overflow vulnerability that could also lead to code execution. That also got a 10 out of 10.
Oh, I love it.
And then the last one was a cross-domain information leak, meaning one site running Flash could learn things about other sites you were also visiting.
Oh, nice.
That one got a score of 4.3 out of 10.
Huh.
And that was also fixed.
So go update your Flash, everybody. And a reminder, although Chrome by default is set to auto-update, Chrome's built-in Flash player has to be updated via updating Chrome itself. So if you have to update Flash on your system if you have Firefox and IE and Air installed separately, and you also have to update Chrome.
Yeah. So you can, if you're anywhere where there's a Flash something, if you right-click, normally it'll bring up the Adobe menu, and you'll see at the bottom I have the version number. Make sure you have at least 11.4.400 something.
Okay.
Most people probably still have 11.3, so it'll be obvious that they need to upgrade.
Okay. Yeah, and I got to say, commonly on our website stats, everybody's one rev behind in the majority of Flash. So let's break the trend on this one.
Part of that mostly is because Flash tends to only do its update when you reboot. Like it checks at boot time. Oh. Well, I don't reboot very often.
Right.
I don't know about you.
Right.
And so I always manually do it.
Good point. Yeah. I don't know if that's true. See, on Linux, it gets updated via my repos whenever I do that. Exactly. But on Windows, it's whenever the little system.
Half the time, the reason I find out there's a Flash update is my media center, which I do turn off when I'm not using. I boot it up and it shows there's a Flash update. I know I need to go do it on my main PC as well.
Yeah, whenever I come across a Windows box that hasn't booted in a little while, that's always one of the things that comes up. Always. Yeah, without fail.
It's because it seems that's the only time it checks. Which honestly is a little less annoying than the Java one that pops up randomly all the time and steals focus from your other apps.
Yes, I know.
It's like popping up and telling me there's a new update is fine. Stealing focus from when I'm typing is not fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, in a related story, Adobe has said they're not going to publish new versions of Flash for Android. They're moving to the Air platform.
Right.
which also was vulnerable to all these things, but is also updated and fixed.
And I don't believe there's any Flash available for Jelly Bean at all.
Right. Although if you had it installed and upgraded to Jelly Bean, it seems to still work. Although they say...
Has that been the case for you?
Yes. They don't know how it'll react. They've never tested it on Jelly Bean, and they don't plan to. So if it works, great. If not, we don't support it.
I like how Adobe pretends like it would take a team of thousands to test it on Jelly Bean, when really, if they just went out and got themselves a Nexus device or two, and one guy for an afternoon could try it. I mean, that's all it would freaking take.
Well, if they had a Nexus S, then it would have upgraded. And
they must have the hardware they've developed for the platform. They must have hardware.
And some of them must be updatable. So that they wouldn't even have to buy any new devices.
Lazy. They build these platforms, and then they are lazy stewards of their platform, and it's disrespectful to their users. Yep.
Well, and more so also to the developers who built products based on their platform.
Who bet on them.
Because that's who pays Adobe, right? Adobe doesn't make money off the fact that I run the Flash player. They make money off the fact that somebody wrote something that I'm going to use in Flash Player.
These are the underlying foundational reasons why Flash needs to die. I mean, all the other accessibility, compatibility, performance, that's all important too. But this stuff right here is really the crap that gets me.
But specifically, now that Adobe's Flash Player isn't found in the Google Store, they've noticed fake Flash players popping up into the store. One of these is actually a malware and adware-laden rootkit, basically, for your phone.
Oh, good one.
So basically, you install this app, get tripped into accepting a dialog, and it roots your phone and installs some adware that continually adds more and more ads to your phone, including a pop-up every 15 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Via the notification system. And it also, in the background, downloads a copy of Flash from somewhere.
Oh, this is great. Yeah,
you actually get Flash, so you think it's working, but
oh, this is so great. I've gotten 3 Flash knockoffs just in the few seconds you've been talking right here from the Play Store, and one of these is really adorable. It's just great. This is great.
Yep.
All right, so watch out, people. Be careful out there.
So
you know what? People that want this scrap deserve it. Let them have it.
Yeah.
All right, Alan. Well, let's take a break here. What do you say? You ready?
Yep.
All right, let's take a break and say hello to the fine folks at GoDaddy.com who are sponsoring this week's episode of the TechSNAP program. And GoDaddy has been rocking support for TechSNAP for a very long time now, and they have a special code that only comes around about once or twice a year, so take note of it because it expires at the end of this month, which is rapidly approaching. When you check out on anything, renewals, new domains, hosting, just use our code GO20OFF5. GO20OFF5 when you're checking out at GoDaddy, and you will save 20% off your order, whatever it be. There you go. Now, Alan, can I ask you, do you know if this is a true SEO thing? If you have, say I have like 15 domains that are just sitting on my GoDaddy account that I haven't really pointed anything because they're like, either I wanted to grab them or they're for older projects when I was younger that I don't do anymore because I was crazy. Do you know if it helps your SEO ranking if I were to take all of those and say point them to JupiterBroadcasting.com?
If you do it with the right kind of redirect, it can help. Basically, Google gives a lot of precedence to your search. If the thing the person is searching for, the keywords, are in the name of the site, then that has a really high rating.
Right.
Also, the title of the page and a couple other things are, or if it's in the URL, if it's in the domain name, that's like the max level. If it's in the rest of the URL, that's good. That's why you'll see WordPress puts like the title of your post.
We do that. Yep, we do that.
The friendly URL.
Yep.
And you'll see almost every news site does that as well. Although some of them just have lots of numbers, and it's like, why are you
doing? You're killing
rewriting
yourself.
that nicely?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you have some domains that have keywords that would be relevant to your site, having them point to your site can be useful.
See, I think I'm going to do that. GoDaddy has, like we talk about all the time on the show, one of my favorite domain name managers out there, and so they have a new pro version that does some templating options. I'm going to look at that to see if I can template just all of those forward to JupiterBroadcasting.com. A great way to take advantage and essentially get some value out of those domain names that I've purchased in the past.
Yeah, because like for example, the one TechSNAP.tv.
Yeah,
that one does quite well and makes Jupiter Broadcasting more relevant for the keyword TechSNAP.
Yeah, exactly. it's perfect for that. And I have all kinds of different ones for Jupyter and stuff. Yep. So that's just one idea.
All kinds of disused domains I need to play with.
This one, I'm putting this out there. People ought to take advantage of this.
Years ago, I was going to start a spin-off of my old blog App Fail, which was basically what I do on TechSNAP, but as a blog.
Yeah.
It was me making fun of, SSL security breaches and password cracking and so on. It was called thecloudisalie.com for making fun of every time there was a failure with like Amazon or Joyent or Microsoft's cloud or Rackspace or whatever.
That was probably back too when cloud was kind of the new buzz term for it.
It's still a ridiculous buzz term that's overused and misused.
Now it's like I think I've just given in and I would just accept it. I was like, okay, fine.
Basically, yes, it was based on the cake is a lie, and it was the cloud is a lie. Specifically that Amazon's cloud is so opaque, you have no idea what's actually going on inside of it.
Right. It's just like a box. It's like a magic box.
How do you build your infrastructure on top of that when it's a black box? You don't know what's actually happening. Mm-hmm. And we kind of saw that with, when there was one of the really big Amazon failures and we tore it apart on TechSNAP. But they were like, well, if you'd followed our suggestions and used multiple availability zones, then you wouldn't have been as affected. And we were like, well, you don't really tell people that anywhere.
Yeah.
If people if you publish more detail on how the Amazon cloud actually works and it wasn't all just in a black box,
then we'd be able to build our
see that.
Yeah, we could build our app so they could sustain. And okay, we should wrap up the GoDaddy app, but I would just say this. The GoDaddy VPS systems, I've played a little bit with them, and I think it's a sleeper hit, and I think it's a true competitor to what Amazon's offering because it gives the end user a lot more control, and it's a little slicker than their system, too. So that might be something to go play with, too, for you hardcore server nerds. Use our code GO20OFF5 when you check out at GoDaddy, and thank you to GoDaddy.com.
Basically, if for no other reason, then you shouldn't put all your eggs in one cloud.
Yeah. And I gotta say, I was just playing with it, and I had a few systems in there, and then I was like, you know what I think I'll do? Add a load balancer, boom, and you just drag the load balancer in front of the other VMs, and it just does all of the routing and networking right there for you, and it has little lines that connects them all. It's very cool. All right, Alan. This next story is something that I think any network administrator is always fearing he's going to read the headline of, and that is where he's got a large deployment of a particular type of hardware, and he's just discovered they all might have a flaw. Is that what's going on here with the RuggedCom switches?
Yes. Well, it's not just the switches. Apparently, it's anything that runs the RuggedCom OS.
Nice.
But the switch is the one that was particularly found to have this problem first.
Oh, goody. That's even better.
Yes. So RuggedCom and their Rugged OS have basically been causing headlines again with a massive security flaw. If you remember back a couple of months ago, we covered a different flaw where there was basically an undocumented user that could log into any RuggedCom device as long as you knew the MAC address of the device.
Right.
And the MAC address of the device was printed in the login screen before the prompt for your username and password.
Yes, I remember that. That was like, I almost lost it when I heard that.
Yeah, it was hilariously bad.
Yes.
And so is this one.
Okay. Oh my God. What is their problem? Okay, let's go. Okay, first tell me what it is, and then I'll pass
the rugged
judgment.
devices are used in very sensitive installations like military bases, train switches, power distribution systems, and power plants for like controlling the power grid, and even just traffic signals use these devices. Now, they're specifically designed to be rugged insofar as standing up to harsh climate conditions, right? They're meant to be left out like on a telephone pole in the rain and snow and freezing weather and so on. And apparently they work well for that, and that's fine. But they don't seem to be ruggedized as far as actual security goes. But it appears that many of these devices have been connected to the internet directly.
Oh my gosh.
Basically to allow for remote management, right? Because if you're going to stick these on the top of a telephone pole, you don't want to have to go climb the telephone pole every time you want to make a change. Which is fine. But when you directly expose them to the public internet, that's just really bad.
Yes.
And it basically allows the security of these systems to be compromised.
I guess the problem is now is the internet is like literally everywhere, so it's just become easier to wire something with the internet than to put it on some sort of private communications network. Yeah. Like in the past, a lot of the stuff that they remotely controlled was using some sort of shortwave radio or using some sort of proprietary communications network.
Or even just like a point-to-point link, which required paying the phone company money to run.
Exactly. It was some sort of monthly line they'd have to rent, and it was just that. That was all there was to it, and that's how they operated. But now the internet comes along and makes it easy to just hook up an Ethernet cable.
Yep. So in this case, the RuggedCom devices use a hard-coded SSL private key, meaning that the secret that's used to decrypt data that's sent to it over SSL from the user to the device can be known by anyone who has ever had access to any one of these devices. So that is, every single RuggedCom uses the same SSL private key.
You're kidding me.
Not even a little bit.
There's not even a way to misunderstand that when you're developing the machine. That is a design decision.
I'll get to that in a second.
I'm getting worked up. I'm getting upset.
So, SSL uses PKI, or public key infrastructure, which is an asymmetric encryption. That means that there's one key that encrypts the data and then a second key that decrypts the data.
Yeah.
The idea is that the public key, the one that encrypts the data, is published as part of the SSL certificate.
Okay.
Right? So it's given away to everybody. So anyone can use that key, encrypt some data, and then only the person who possesses that private key can read the data.
Right.
That's why the private keys are kept secret and not shared with anybody, and usually encrypted with a password.
Sounds legit so far.
Yeah. Well, it seems that RuggedCom uses exactly the same key on every single device that runs the OS.
I don't. I gotta get a drink. This is ridiculous. Hold on.
Yeah. So it seems that all RuggedCom devices use the same SSL key.
Let's back up and remind that these are devices that are specifically meant for infrastructure type use.
Yeah, they're meant to be, left outside in the cold and run like power switching stations and train switching stations and, water pumps, and just, they're SCADA systems basically.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is such a large security fiasco that it defies classification. I don't even know how to explain how bad this is because I've never heard of anything this bad before.
Yeah.
So basically, in order for this to have happened, every single person involved with building the RuggedCom OS and devices must have entirely lacked any understanding of how SSL works.
You think? I don't think it was intentional. It seems like, how do you,
how is it not possible that one person that works there realizes that, all right, SSL has separate keys so that people can't decrypt your encrypted stuff?
The only thing I could maybe figure that might make sense is if that component of their operating system was developed by like a third-party firm, or they bought it off the shelf and they incorporated it into their product.
I don't know. I just don't know why it isn't set up so that the device is shipped with no key, and the first time you turn it on, it generates a random key.
One. Yeah.
That's how everything else works. A lot of these devices will end up with a self-signed certificate that you can replace if you want to have an actual certificate, but each self-signed certificate is at least different. Yeah, it just boggles my mind.
After the MAC address password buffoonery, and now this SSL buffoonery, these are two design decisions that went into the actual making of the frickin' thing. I mean, like, at this point out, if it was one... these guys got to go in the Hall of Shame. I think
they're already in the Hall of Shame from last time.
Oh, wow. Well, so any word on an update from RuggedCom, like a firmware update that?
Not yet. So the researcher who discovered these vulnerabilities, Justin Clark, who's actually the guy that discovered the previous one as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Was basically able to get the SSL key from various RuggedCom devices that he just went and bought on eBay. Right? We talked about that before in the previous episode. He basically wanted to test a bunch of these SCADA systems after we all heard about how badly insecure they were. Mm-hmm. So he bought a bunch, spread them out, apparently on his bed in his apartment, and started playing with them. And he apparently discovered that they all had the same SSL key, and he was baffled by this because he didn't buy them all from the same place, right? He just bought them off eBay, so they came from different places.
Well, what's depressing about that is it's not like
SSL key.
I mean, anybody could do that. So that means that there's probably people.
It's not something you would check for because you would just never expect anyone to be that stupid.
Yeah. I guess so. I guess it's like it's so basic. It's kind of like when you troubleshoot something for a while and you realize the Ethernet cable was unplugged or something. It's like it's that basic. It's like so fundamental that you don't even think to try.
Ethernet cable unplugged happens so often that that's the first thing you check.
Okay. All right.
Right?
I guess it's not like
power, and you check the power's connected.
Surge
and
protectors flipped on.
Yeah. Right. Does it have power? Does it? Right. When you're debugging something with the network, you work up the stack. So layer 2 is the Ethernet cable there.
You're right.
And
so it's,
can I find the MAC address? Do I have an IP address? Can I get a route to the? Can I ping the default gateway? And so on. And so on.
I don't think I would ever check. Yeah, I don't know. I would never. check
It's just something. It just baffles.
I honestly would make the erroneous assumption. The first, a lot of times when you get a new hardware appliance, the first boot is the longest. Or the first time you apply a new firmware, and if it generates something, it always takes the longest. And it's like, okay, I just kind of assume that's how they're all going to operate. The industry just decided this is how we're going to do it.
They normally have a slow processor embedded in them, and generating a strong RSA key takes a little bit longer, especially on a couple hundred megahertz versus a couple of gigahertz processor.
Yeah. Jeez. Wow. Well, any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah. Well, so in addition to being able to decrypt the communications between a user and the device, if you have the device's private key, right, it would mean that if I was listening on the wire, I could then decrypt it and see your username and password as you're submitted over SSL. If I got that, then I could log into the device myself and have at it. But not just being able to get the credentials or other sensitive information. If the attacker has the SSL private key, they could modify the response sent back to you, right? So I could make it look like when you log in the switch that everything's normal, but in reality, I've changed stuff. Right? Like if you think back to the Stuxnet with the Siemens centrifuges
refinement,
yeah, they basically their update code they were running on there was such that if you looked at the display,
it would return back like everything's okay.
Yeah. Basically, the device would say, yes, I'm spinning at this RPM, but in reality, it was spinning up and down really fast until it burned out the motor.
Right.
But not only that, the other thing you could do is you have the SSL private key. You basically become the trusted party in the transaction, right? Because the whole point of SSL is that no one could talk to me unless they had this private key, which I know only this one person is supposed to have, except for in this case, everybody has it. You could send back a response that, say, embedded a malicious flash code.
Oh, yeah.
Use the exploit we just talked about in Adobe to infect the computer of the administrator. So the person that's logging into the switch to administer it, infect their computer with the Trojan. And then now you're not only inside their network on a trusted machine, but now you can install a keylogger for everything the admin does.
Right. And who knows what that admin machine is?
Not just the RuggedCom switch, every device in the entire network.
And that machine's got any firewall exception. It needs to be able to reach to something to manage it and all that kind of stuff.
It's like, it's normally you aim for the monitoring server.
Right.
Because it's something you can hack that it has exceptions to everything. But the administrator's PC is like the holy grail.
Although, you know what? You just injected a little bit of brief wisdom right there. Like if you're ever trying to compromise something, one of the first things you can go after is the monitoring server. So you're right about that.
It's allowed through all the firewalls and it has exceptions. Honestly, my monitoring server has an exception so it doesn't get banned for SSL login attempts.
Well, yeah, because it's doing it over and over again, right?
Yeah, because a couple of the things I monitor require logging in over SSH with a key. And sometimes that goes a little haywire.
Wow, RuggedCom sucks.
Yeah. So ISC CERT, which is it's part of the Department of Homeland Security now, and they issue advisories about this type of stuff, that especially when it affects infrastructure type stuff, is recommending that all RuggedCom devices be isolated from the internet and only accessed over VPNs to reduce the risk of this attack being pulled off.
Interesting enough, they're a Siemens subsidiary, so they're actually owned by Siemens.
It was bought by Siemens about a year ago, I think. I think it was after the first one was discovered, but before it was reported or something. I forget.
Siemens has just got a whole catalog of products that shouldn't be hooked up to the internet, don't they?
Yeah. Basically, all SCADA devices shouldn't be hooked up to the internet. That's my next point. Why any device, anything like these RuggedCom things, anything that's controlling critical infrastructure is connected directly to the public-facing internet just boggles my mind. Why?
Well, the worst part about these is these could be like these could be like the devices where the public internet's coming into it, and then they're isolating off SCADA systems and plugging in the SCADA systems to the other end of one of these RuggedCom devices, and it could be the thing that's could be compromised. It's
right, because that was the one we talked about in TechSNAP 55. It was there was these devices that were never designed to be on the internet. They only had a serial port.
Right.
And then RuggedCom made this handy little device you plug into the serial port, and it makes it accessible over Telnet.
And now that RuggedCom device is incredibly compromisable.
Yes.
Either through their stupid login system, which is incredibly easy to use if you have physical access, or now through a handy remotely exploitable method. So you just pick and choose whatever works better for you.
Yeah, and I got some coverage from Reuters, which has some really good stuff, and I think they have some quotes from some interviews, and also Security Week had a good post on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Then I also have links to threat post coverage of the previous flaw, and they have basically kind of a follow-up piece that was a little bit later than what we talked about on TechSNAP, and I also included a link to TechSNAP episode 55, Obscurity is Not Security, where we talk about the original RuggedCom compromise.
Well
if you
done,
haven't seen that yet.
Check that out, folks. And if you have these systems in use somewhere, you can get up to date on this stuff. All right, should we talk about this next?
As far as we know, there is no fix for this yet. Although,
I know.
If you, I don't know how these devices work per se, but if you have access, like SSH or something, you could just generate your own RSA private key and switch all your SSL to use that.
If they give you that kind of access, right?
Yeah, I don't know if they do, and I imagine they don't.
Yeah, because otherwise you think that would have been the advice other than just disconnect it from the internet. Yeah, they might not give that. Anyways, but if they do, try it. Next story?
Yes.
Okay, so this next story comes out that I had not even caught this one, but it's from trustier.com. What's the story on?
Yes, so this is the same guys that reported on the airport thing.
Right.
Because basically they're a company that specializes in designing systems to prevent malware and phishing attacks from being able to get your credentials. So they've basically discovered a new type of financial or banking malware that demonstrates some interesting features to defeat the bank's risk analysis systems.
Oh, really?
Yes. So in a normal man-in-the-browser or keylogger type malware attack, it targets your banking credentials. And so basically it runs on your computer, waits for you to go to your bank's website and type in your username and password. And then it sends those to the fraudster, who can then log into your account and send himself all your money, usually through mules to make it harder to track. But anyway, in a later iteration, the man-in-the-browser attacks would prompt you for the answers to your secret questions. So when you go to log into your bank, even though your bank isn't asking you for your secret questions because you're logging in from the same computer you've normally logged into, so they don't bother asking.
Right.
The malware makes it look like they're asking so that the malware can learn the answers to your secret questions.
So even if they don't prompt, it can still monitor.
Well, because the fraudster is going to be prompted for these answers.
Right.
When he tries
coming from a new machine.
Because he's coming from a different machine or a different area.
Right. Huh. That's pretty clever.
So they would basically inject this, and then those man-in-the-browsers would normally also modify the pages once you were logged in so that your bank balance would appear like what it was supposed to be. So if they steal $5,000 from your account, they know to take whatever bank balance the bank is actually returning and add the $5,000 back. So when you look at your account balance, it looks like what it's supposed to be. It's going up and down like it's supposed to be.
I'm done
in
using
reality,
computers. Nope.
A bunch of your money is missing.
I don't want that. That's too far.
Right. So that's an older version of this attack.
Oh, lovely.
So at that level, the man-in-the-browser attacks were basically confounded by two-factor authentication. Right? Because another bit of data would come in out of band, and that would only be useful once.
Right.
So it would ask you for the code we just text message you, and you'd have to type it in, and it would only work once.
Yeah, and then it's going to expire.
Yeah. So keylogged information wouldn't allow the fraudster to actually get access to your account.
Right.
So then, they started doing things like, so in the newer version, what it does now is actually stop your browser from communicating with your bank at all. So you go to your bank, you get to the login page, you type in your username, your password, and the code that comes up from your authenticator app. This one works on ones where the authenticator, you run the authenticator on your phone, you get the number, and you type it in. It's not one that's sent to you separately.
Right.
It's the one that's based on an app on your phone rather than
my Google Auth one where
those ones mostly because the problem with SMS is it's not that reliable. Sometimes it'll take 10 minutes for you to get the code, and if you want to log into your bank, you don't want to wait 10 minutes.
Right.
And also the app-based ones are just easier for the companies to do. and easier to do a bunch of things with. Anyway,
I would think they should be more secure too, since they're not using SMS.
Right. But with this new tag, basically, so you go to your bank's website, you type in your username or your card number, your password, and your authenticator code. And the man in the browser returns an error message making it look like your bank is apologizing that they're down for maintenance for an hour or something, right?
Okay.
And in reality, it just sent your username, your password, and your authenticator code that's good for 30 seconds or whatever to the fraudster, who then immediately uses it to log into your bank.
So they really got to jump.
Your money.
They got to be ready to jump.
Right, because they only get a very small window because of the authenticator code.
Do you think they could automate the other end when it receives it? Do you think they
Possibly,
could?
Yep. Yeah. Especially if you're targeting just one bank. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And for a short term.
Yeah.
And the reason they block you is the bank's fraud screening system. So the bank detects, like, when you log in once, like on the link, they have an example of some timelines for it, where if you log in California or whatever, and then the hacker logs in Florida, within a few minutes of you, the bank knows you couldn't possibly have traveled from California to Florida in 5 minutes.
Right.
So it flags your account as possibly compromised.
Right, okay.
So the attacker actually blocks you from getting to your bank so that you don't, so his logging in from somewhere other than where you are
doesn't register that.
Trip the alarm.
Yeah. Jeez, is this really happening? Is this for real?
Yes.
I mean,
so Trustier makes systems for detecting this kind of thing for banks. So if they're talking about this, I'm pretty sure it's actually happening.
So they're selling a service, but if they're selling a service, that means there's probably a market for it. Although it's in their best interest to scare people a little bit, but none of this really seems out of the realm of possibility. It seems like it's pretty doable.
Yes,
especially like you mentioned, if it's targeted, if you know the website, if you know their questions.
Exactly. If you're just targeting one, especially in Canada, there are only 5 major banks, so it's much easier to target a specific bank. Well, and I think even in the States, there's quite a few large banks that you could target and get a large enough sampling of people that you could.
You go after Chase or Bank of America or one of those, and you'd probably you get a pretty wide net, I would assume. I feel scary. I shouldn't even say that. I feel like now they're going to come get me. the Secret Service. All right. Well, any other thoughts on that one?
No, just that's pretty scary. So the real message is, make sure your browser doesn't have any man in the browser add-ons.
Yeah. Keep up to date on all that stuff, and
and
stop using Internet Explorer, people. I know IE10's cool, and that's new.
It's not cool at all. It's just
I try to meet them halfway on common ground and then pull them away from IE, because really, when you see this stuff happen, it's almost always with Internet Explorer when it's these kind of browser
one
add-ons.
Just wonders, especially if you've ever switched to Firefox or Chrome or whatever, why you would ever go back.
I have people say they like it.
I know, but it's basically, fooled me twice, shame on me.
I know.
I'm
with you.
If I keep falling for the same shit, it's my fault.
It is, right? Well, and it's
the first time you trick someone, it's not very nice. It's your fault. You shouldn't trick people. But
and I can understand
when they keep falling for it over and over and over again, it's not really your fault anymore.
The problem is the people that really need to switch away from Internet Explorer don't know they've been tricked. Like, right. I literally have had people, I've been dealing with clients recently that have had just the most egregious junk in their browser. Like, we're talking like entire iframe embeds on every page, and 5 toolbars on every browser window, and they don't understand why things don't work correctly. I'm not trying to make fun of them, because they're really put in a disadvantaged position because their experience sucks, and I'm sure they're getting keyloggered and all that kind of crap. So it's a mess. So us geeks out there have to do a service and help those people out and get that crap cleaned up to put these people out of business. Geeks unite. All right, Alan. Well, I think that's all the news for this week. So that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. And thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or filling out the contact form located at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting site, or submitting a discussion thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Now, we got a good batch of email this last week, and I want to say thank you to everybody. We're going to feature, I think, about 4 of them this week, and we're holding some for our Q&A episode, so if we don't get to yours this week, don't fret, and keep sending them in, because we're going to be doing an all Q&A episode in October, and we want to get your emails.
We need lots and lots of questions, because, we'll be filming the one episode where, for the week that I won't be in Canada, early, and since it's going to be early, there won't be any news from that week, because we won't be around to know what the news. We can't predict the future. Anyway, so it'll be a Q&A episode, and so we need lots of questions.
Yeah, and while we're talking about email, the Jupiter Signal is coming out next Tuesday, I believe. So go over to bit.ly and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We'll have info in there about, I'm sure, about Eurocon BSD or BSD Eurocon, whatever.
Euro BSD Con.
I don't know. It's BSD. I tune out. And then, just kidding. And also, I've got a write-up I'm doing in there about secrets behind Unfilter. So that'll be coming out next Tuesday if you don't have our newsletter. Check it out. But Alan, let's do our first email. You ready, sir?
Yep.
Okay, this one came in from Rami again, and it is Chef versus Puppet. Okay, all right, here we go. Hey, Alan, have you heard of Chef? And he gives the link to it. I use this for my VPS service, and I like it because it's because of the Chef solo part. Okay, that way it runs without a master server. On the node itself. That's interesting. And he's got some example links there. He says everything you said about Puppet is possible with Chef, but I've never used Puppet. So I'm going to check that out. But it seems like the thing he likes about it is if you don't want to do anything complex, you can do it without a central server.
Puppet can do exactly the same thing. You just use the Puppet apply command instead of the Puppet agent command.
So did you look at Chef when you were kind of deciding which system?
Not really. From what I've read, Puppet was basically designed as a derivative from Chef. So a lot of it you'll find there's almost exactly analogous. And actually, they both use exactly the same ERB language for the templates, which is basically Ruby.
Oh, that's nice.
So it gives you, so the templates are quite close together as well. So in general, they seem to be very similar. I honestly, the reason I started with Puppet was they have some patches to make it work better on FreeBSD.
Oh, yes.
And I saw that at the BSD conference I'm going to, somebody's giving a talk about using Puppet on FreeBSD. And basically from that and the article in the BSD magazine that I linked to last week when we talked about Puppet, I decided that meant it's going to work.
Yeah, there's actually some energy behind
where I
FreeBSD.
started.
Yeah.
Right. And now even we'll get to that in the next question, but basically I'm kind of invested in it now, and I've got it working, and it's deploying servers all over the place. I've got it doing.
That's the key thing, is just use something, right?
Right. So basically, the way I have it set up is it deploys a base system on all my new servers, and then it deploys a jail on top of that. And from a template, not a Puppet template, but just like a jail template.
Okay.
With easy jail. And that template already has Puppet installed. So as soon as the jail virtual machine starts on each of these host machines, it checks in with the master. I sign that certificate, and then the jail gets configured as well.
That's nice.
Because we run the video server, because it has to run as root, it runs in a jail so that it's isolated from the rest of the system.
Very good.
Also, just because I'm not a huge fan of Java, I wanted it isolated from the base packages in the main system.
Yes.
Plus, it solves a whole bunch of problems to be able to just stick it in a jail. Including the fact that by default it tries to bind to every IP address, and I want them separate, so I just jail it up and it works good.
And that jail runs as a specific user, which then has special rights attributed to it, and
and just the directory structure, it just isolates everything, and it's really nice. But anyway, so it's working that, and now I've actually extended it. We have a similar setup for our non-video servers. And then we have a similar setup for our Origin web cluster, which is what runs the actual JupyterBroadcasting.com. So we're in the process of, I'm still setting that up, but basically we deploy the base system, although the base system is different for the machines that are in our rack in Toronto as opposed to rented machines. And then it runs a different type of jail for running the PHP application server, which has a different set of configuration. And that'll all be managed by Puppet as well.
That's awesome. God, I got to get my hands on Puppet.
Yes. So basically, I started with Puppet because I heard it worked well with BSD.
Like the chat room says, Alan, whatever floats your cloud. Whatever floats your cloud. That's a good one. That goes to Jason S. All right, should we do the next email?
Yeah.
All right. Along the same lines, that's why I stick these two together here. This one comes in from David. He says, "Hi, guys. Listening to your segment on Puppet, I used Puppet in my previous job to manage 1,600 render servers and 500 CentOS desktops." Ooh, yikes. CentOS desktops, yikes. I can tell you it does not scale well at all. We started running into issues at only about 25% capacity of the above numbers. We had to do some funky stuff like put the manifest on an NFS share. All the servers and clients had at build time, and who had to make cron jobs to CD into that folder, run it like it was a local manifest with a randomized start time and checks, etc., so that way they wouldn't step on each other. At my new place of work, I'm going to implement saltstack.org. Looks to scale much, much better and adds a very slick remote execution part, much better than Puppet. With Salt, you can push config changes from the master, so you can make it in an SVN hook on the master, for example. Then he goes on to
as soon
say,
as you commit a change, it pushes it out.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Although you can actually push up from the master in Puppet as well, if your servers are configured that way.
So he says, check out saltstack.org and keep up the good work.
Basically, I did, and it's like, well, if you had told me that 2 weeks ago before I started, I might have built it on Salt instead.
Really?
But
You
now
liked it,
I'm kind of invested into Puppet.
Yeah.
Apparently, SaltStack also has support for BSD, although I've never talked to anybody who's used it. So, and basically, I've talked to a couple of people that are using Puppet on BSD, and so that's kind of why I started with Puppet. It looks like maybe I made the wrong choice. I
would say Puppet looks like it's much further along. I mean, this looks like, looking at their site, my initial impression is they're kind of new a little bit. And you're kind of operating at a business scale where maybe you don't want to work with something that's kind of new. Plus, you also have the stink of the people talking at the conventions, and you can go up and talk to them about it. So I don't know, I wouldn't.
And part of the scaling problem with Puppet is the built-in web server, but you can replace that by using like Mongrel or Passenger and putting Nginx in front of that. That
makes sense. That would trip up.
Yeah, and basically, we have some other ways to make it scale if we have to. We're a company that specializes in scaling things, so I'm sure we can figure out a way to make this scale.
As Grippy Uncle points out in the chat room, Floss Weekly did an interview with the Salt guys if people are interested in that.
I will have to check that out.
Should we go to Sean's FreeBSD question?
Yes.
All right,
here you go. This one by email, so I actually have a modified version of the email that I sent back to him.
Oh, okay. So you've already responded? No, okay, here we go. So this is from Sean, and he says, I've deployed pfSense right on for a few customers with great success. And after hearing about all the new features of FreeBSD 9 on LAS, funny enough, I started dipping my toes into BSD via PCBSD. So far, it's been great, but I still have a lot to learn. Anyhow, I'm looking for information on installing FreeBSD with PCBSD Live Installer, and I stumbled upon this article, and he links us to the article, and you guys can get that link in the show notes. During the interview with Chris Moore, the creator of PCBSD, he mentions running Linux in a BSD jail. What? How could this work? I thought a jail was a sandbox BSD environment. Anyhow, love the show. I've been watching since episode 1 and look forward to it every week, along with LAS, Coda Radio, and the Faux Show. You guys make 4 of my 5 podcasts. You guys do great work. Well, thanks, Sean. So, Alan, is that true? Can you run Linux in a jail?
Yes, you can. Although it's not actually Linux if you do.
Okay.
But I'll get to that in a sec.
Okay.
So FreeBSD has a Linux compatibility layer that I've talked about before called the Linuxulator.
Right. Okay.
So basically, it's a kernel module that you can load in the FreeBSD kernel, and it basically translates Linux system calls into FreeBSD system calls. What this lets you do is run precompiled binaries for Linux on BSD. So if you basically, there's a package you can install called base Linux that installs like CentOS or Fedora or basically the basic like libraries like libc and SSL and all that stuff into a subdirectory.
Sorry to interrupt, but is this still kernel 2.2?
No, 2.6.
Okay, all right, 2.6. Okay, all right, that's better. Sorry, I must be on an old page.
There might be a newer version now, although I think at the time 9.0 came out, 2.6 was still the newest. But yeah, there's a modern enough kernel. It was 2.4 in like FreeBSD 4.11. So
I was on an old page is what it was.
Yes.
I saw an old guide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Anyway, so it has at least a 2.6 kernel in it.
Okay.
And then, so you can basically, if you install the basic RPMs from CentOS to give you like libc and SSL and all the basic libraries that your Linux binary is going to be linked against, then basically you can run a Linux binary on a FreeBSD machine. This works especially for like commercial Linux applications, like scientific apps like MATLAB or game servers.
The Quake server is a popular one, right?
Yeah, the Quake server or like Counter-Strike source and all those stuff. The TeamSpeak server used to use Linux compatibility mode. Now they actually make a native FreeBSD binary. But
Alan, and why would you do this instead of like a virtual box, and you'd have like a full Linux?
This has been around for so long that back then, A, you didn't have enough RAM to run virtual machines, and B, virtual machines were slow as shit.
Right,
now they're not so much with hardware virtualization, but basically back then it wasn't.
So are you saying maybe they're not applicable anymore, or do you think they're still?
They're still better because you get native speed.
Hardware raw, right on the metal.
Yeah. And you don't have to install the whole Linux OS, right? Linux isn't actually running on any of this. You just need the dynamic libraries because the Linux binary is dynamically linked against that specific binary. Right?
That's interesting. That makes sense. I see.
So basically, you install just the very 100 megabytes worth of RPMs from CentOS under user local compat for compatibility.
Yeah.
And you can run Linux binaries out of the box.
Kernel 2.6 support was added by Google in the Summer of Code in 2006.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Because so it allows you to run not open source stuff that with a regular app like say MySQL or Apache or whatever, you get the source code so you can just compile a FreeBSD binary. Mm-hmm. But for some closed source stuff, that's not an option.
Like vendor apps.
That's
why CentOS makes a lot of sense because that's what most of those types of apps are compatible with.
Right. And that's why BSD has this, because I don't want to have a whole Linux box just to run one application. Mm-hmm. I can just run it on my BSD box. Mm-hmm. Anyway, when you create a jail, which in FreeBSD is basically a second install of the OS that's in a CH root, and it uses the original host kernel, so there's no second kernel, no wasted resources. Mm-hmm. It's just basically a container that you can run. It runs the whole OS. It starts the init scripts from the beginning, and basically you have a separate username and password files, and you can basically have real machine performance, but locked down basically to specific IP address and specific file system.
I was just going to ask, does it get its own virtual network interface, or does it use the hosts? Or
the way it works is you assign the jail one or more IP addresses that you have bound to your physical network cards.
Okay.
Now that address could just be on a virtual loopback adapter. Right. So you can create a second loopback adapter and just give it some internal IP like 127.0.0.5.
So then your host and your Linux box can communicate between each other, but nothing from the outside.
And then you can decide to NAT that out if you want. If you only have one public IP, then you can NAT that out.
Right.
On our setup, some of our jails have just an internal IP address. So other jails on other machines in the same LAN can talk to it, and then it gets NATed out to the internet. Some of our jails actually have a public IP, and because they run a web server that needs people to be able to connect into it.
Yeah, like JupiterBroadcasting.com.
Yeah. One of the interesting with the jails is any port that's not being used in the jail and is being used on the host will fall through. So if I make a jail that runs just like SSH in a web server, if I have a mail server running on the host, then if you connect to the mail server port in the jail, that'll actually connect to the host. The jail doesn't take over the whole IP address.
Right.
It just overrides anything that it's using. If you want to do it that way, you can set it up that way.
That's nice.
It's actually an improvement. In the old one, you had to make sure that none of the apps in the host bound to that IP address. Yeah. Otherwise, they would block it from being used in the jail. But somebody made a patch and fixed it. Anyway, so basically it allows you to run a second copy of FreeBSD with a different configuration in a container on top of the original one at hardware speed. Because of the way that works, you can actually install CentOS in a jail instead. So you just create a CH root and just install the whole CentOS system in there. And then CentOS will boot when you start the jail, and it'll actually run the CentOS init daemon. And CentOS will start, and it'll use the CentOS CHK config system or systemd or whatever they use now. And it basically runs the entire Linux in this jail.
It's none the wiser. That's awesome.
Yeah. Although it won't technically be Linux because Linux is the kernel, and that's the part that's not being used here.
Right. Well, as a FreeBSD guy, you're okay with that.
Yeah. And now, this is perfectly valid under the license, right? You can use the GNU apps with the BSD kernel. There's that project at Debian to actually build a system where you have the native GNU no, it's GNU, the native GNU binaries with a FreeBSD kernel.
Oh yeah. Like KDEP or no, what are they called?
KFreeBSD.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
KFreeBSD/GNU. So
Yeah.
instead of GNU herd or Linux GNU, you end up with.
Is that actually going anywhere though?
I don't think so, because why do that when you run jail?
All right. When any other notes on Sean's question?
So there's, if you Google it, there's some how-tos on how to do that, although it's kind of complicated. One case where you might want to do something like that is the Adobe Flash Media Server. We don't use that. We use something else. But one of the problems we had when we were looking at it originally was it only works on CentOS. Like, it won't even work on like Debian, right? Because it depends on basically, they only give you the stuff to make it work with CentOS's like system scripts and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't want to have a Linux server, so I could set up CentOS in a jail and run the Adobe Flash server on top of that. But what's really interesting is he mentioned PCBSD. So PCBSD has built this new GUI app called Warden, which is basically a management system for jails.
Ooh.
They also have a fancy management system for ZFS if you don't want to play with the command line.
Ooh.
And the installer is getting overhauled in PCBSD 9.1, which should come out in a month or so.
You mean they're just including this in PCBSD?
Yeah. The ZFS thing?
Yeah, the ZFS management.
I think it's been in since 9.0, although it's getting more work in 9.1.
I gotta check out PCBSD. This is awesome.
In the new version, they'll be able to build a system where you install the whole OS on top of ZFS as well. So you can have a ZFS only system.
Good.
Because ZFS works better if you give it the whole device instead of just a partition.
So they're also giving a tool to manage jails as well?
Yes. So they have a new tool called Warden for managing jails. And apparently, I haven't actually used this, and I'm just reading a little bit about it, but apparently it has the ability to deploy one of these Linux jails for you. So they've like automated the process. So you can just say, I need a Linux jail for some Linux app.
Oh, this is killer awesome.
Although I don't know off the top of my head of any app where you would need a Linux environment instead of a BSD one. Although if you're trying to cross-compile or like... if you're responsible for package management and you have to make BSD packages and CentOS packages, you could do it on one machine this way.
So check this out, Alan. Their jail manager app. When you create a new jail, it says, "Would you like to make a traditional jail or a ports jail where it allows you running X applications out of this jail and things like that, or a Linux jail?" So it's got three options, and one of them is, "We'll just set up a Linux jail for you."
It's really, because it used to be a rather complicated process.
Oh my gosh!
Some people have perfected it. I know some businesses that in production have CentOS servers that are actually FreeBSD.
Oh, and so you just pointed. So they have, like, in this example, they're actually doing Debian. They're not even doing CentOS, but you could do CentOS too.
Well, and then CentOS is the one I heard about people doing at BSDCam. But
they give you like a start and stop manager screen where you can get tools, you can take snapshots, and you can configure them to boot it at startup.
Yeah, and the very most interesting thing is that the FreeBSD version of ZFS includes native support for jails. So you can make a ZFS volume that is only accessible inside a certain jail.
God, you are slowly going to convert the host of the Linux Action Show into a BSD user, and that is going to be an internet train wreck. It can't have this happen, Alan. This cannot happen, but this sounds so awesome.
It is.
Although, really, I could accomplish a lot of the stuff in virtualization, but... it's not the same.
Yeah, but virtualization is slow.
Yeah. All right, should we move on?
You can run VirtualBox on top of FreeBSD, although only the open source edition.
Should we move on to Wojtek's question? You ready?
Sure.
All right, so Wojtek writes in. He says, "Hey guys, love the show. I haven't missed a single episode. Alan, are you planning on visiting on any other places in Poland around EuroBSDCon? I live in Krakow."
No, basically, I get Krakow.
Krakow.
I get in the noon the day before the conference starts, and it's over 12 hours of flying, so I'm probably going to be quite wrecked.
He wanted to grab a bite with you, I think.
Well, if he's going to be in Warsaw, we'll be having dinner every night. Yes, but
he did say he'd be up for meeting up in Warsaw. He did.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have a meetup. There's a. If you look at the agenda for EuroBSDCom, there's a social time blocked off. So I'm probably going to meet up with a bunch of people then, if anybody else is interested as well. If if you live over here, it's probably not feasible to go to Poland. Although I'll be at BSDCan in the spring of next year. Also, I might make it to Meet BSD in California in November, although I don't have specific plans to do that yet.
Wow. How come they don't do this stuff in Washington? I got to get you up here, get you to the house, get you in studio.
Well,
that'd be
I
kinda
guess
fun.
maybe I'll make it to the next Linux Fest or something.
Oh, that'd be cool. Well, yeah, boy, you just have a blast at Linux Fest. Actually, there are BSD people there, and Chris Moore from PCBSD is almost there every year.
He was there at BSD Can.
He and I we bump into each other at Linux Fest every year and catch up and be like, how you been this year? He's a really nice guy. Yep. And he's always wearing like some sort of like BSD devil ears or something like that.
Yes,
all right, so
they were giving them away at BSD Can.
Yeah. So I
sadly didn't get any.
He goes on to say, guys, I'd love an episode on virtual networking. I run a dedicated box with Proximox as a host and Ubuntu VMs. As long as the VMs have public IPv4 addresses communicating between them, it's easy. But as public IP blocks add an extra cost, and I'd like to put up some more VMs for testing, logging, etc., I'd love to set up routing via the host machine or public VMs. Unfortunately, so far my attempts at setting up this in IP tables have resulted in Debian falling back to the old config, and I don't want to meddle with the host settings too much as the server gets filled with production apps. Hence my question, how should I properly set up virtual networking? Many thanks.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he means, but you could use something like NAT. If you bridge all of the virtual machines to a second adapter, like your internal, like 192.168 type network, then you could then NAT that traffic out to the internet. That's what I do with, I have a lot of internal jails. Like, for example, the PHP application servers that run JupyterBroadcasting.com. When you hit that, our web server is connecting to one of our app servers where that thing runs on like one of 15 machines. And all of those go out via a single IP for NAT, because why waste 15 good public IPs?
So I guess, from a practical standpoint, you would have all of your internal VMs hooked up to a private, network. Yep. You can just create, in VirtualBox or whatever you're using, you can just create another network in there. You attach them all to that. And then on your public host, you have one network bound to an actual physical NIC that's hooked up to the internet. And then you have another NIC plugged into the virtual machine that is hooked up to the guest network. And you just have it route, and that becomes the default gateway for all your other machines. And it will route out.
So you can use NAT that way.
Why not put a pfSense? Why not put a pfSense box in there and do it through that?
Some other options, a lot of these virtualization things have networking where you can create like internal LANs for traffic between your VMs, so it never has to touch the real network interface and things like that. But yeah, basically, if you set it up so that every virtual machine was on an virtual network with the inside interface of a pfSense, and then your pfSense virtual machine had a second NIC bound to your real internet, then your pfSense could hold one IP and route for all of the internal machines. And that would mean all your virtual machines could share one IP address via NAT, and you could do port forwarding as needed. Although, depending what they're running, if they're running a web servers or whatever, you probably need them to be exposed.
Yeah. If it's not doing the web server thing, I would go with that route.
If people need to be able to connect to them from outside, other than like management stuff, which you can set up like a VPN or whatever, or port forwarding. But if they're running like a service people have to connect to, like mail or web or whatever, then they probably need real IPs. And yes, they're kind of expensive, but what are you going to do?
Yeah. All right.
If you're running multiple web servers that can all be on one IP, you can use the load balancer built into pfSense. Or you can run Nginx on pfSense.
There you go. So that'd be our recommendations. Now, remember, we are doing that Q&A episode, and we want your suggestions for the noobs. Somebody coming into your field, if you're a system administrator, a developer, a network engineer, whatever field you're in this audience of ours, and you have advice for new people coming into your field, something you wish they knew when they were coming onto the job, email that to us, and we'll cover it. We'll do like a boot camp for the noobs. Just send that to TechSNAP@JupyterBroadcasting.com, or you can start you can join the thread that Gutter Gulch has started on our TechSNAP subreddit at links.techsnap.tv. We'll have a link to this in the show notes, and you can put it in here and get the community discussing along with you and commiserating and things like that. And transversely, if you're a noob and you wish your elders, or the more experienced, those maybe they're not their elders, but they're just more experienced, you wish they would be maybe a little more sharing, a little more understanding about a particular certain topic, go ahead and email that to us as well, and we'll cover those. TechSNAP@JupyterBroadcasting.com, and we'll round all those up in our Q&A episode, and I think that's going to be a lot of fun. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the feedback for this week, so that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are the stories that didn't quite make it to the very top of the show, but we still wanted to talk about them maybe a little more briefly and provide you links to follow up and read up on your own. And they're almost always exclusively provided by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Alan, are you ready for the first story from the Roundup? Okay. This one's pretty wild. It comes from Ars Technica. A virtual machine, VMware, has become the target of some malware that can jump from the host into the virtual guest. Do I have that right, Alan?
Yes, that's first time I've seen that.
Right.
We've talked about before about malware that's managed to jump from the virtual machine to the host, basically to escape the virtual machine. But this one actually goes from the host into the virtual machine.
And what's interesting is it's targeting Windows and Mac OS X. So I don't see anything on here about Linux, but you always are worried that we've had people email in and ask, can I truly trust having something isolated in a VM? And we always say, well, to the best of our knowledge, yes, but it could be technically conceivable. Something could come up with something that would leap from host to guest. So now we've seen it.
No, most people would be more worried about something getting from the guest to the host because, you're isolating a guest into a container for a reason.
Right.
Right? Like if you're going to be, security researchers that test malware, they
you don't want that to get back onto the host. Yeah.
Right. They do it in a VM because it's a lot easier to roll back or clean up a VM than it is to clean up the host. But yeah, this one goes from the host into the guest, which is interesting.
I guess the nice thing would be is if you were able to compromise the host, then you could get all of the guests.
Yeah. So it may be interesting as far as, compromising servers that are running in VMs. So, if you manage to compromise the host machine, then you can get into each of the VMs and screw around with it, especially if they're running like Hyper-V or something. And so it's a Windows machine with a bunch of other Windows machines running on top of it.
Alan, are you ready to go to the next story? Because I've been waiting to get your opinion on it all week. All right. So this next story is Amazon announced this week their Glacier storage service, storage in the cloud with Amazon Glacier, and they're charging a penny a gigabyte.
Yes. So this system is basically a companion to S3, which they charge 12.5 cents per gigabyte on. The main difference is with S3, your files are retrievable at any time and on a larger scale. Like the idea with S3 is not very often accessed files or like medium accessed files and basically you can there's a URL and you can post the file like on a website or something.
Yeah.
Whereas I've seen a lot of people try to use that as a CDN for hosting like big pictures on their website or something.
I've actually used it in a pinch for podcasts, which, it's
right. Although for that kind of scale, you should actually use CloudFront.
Oh God! Well, it's all just
in front of S3, but basically makes it cost twice as much.
Oh, it's so expensive.
Yes, because you have to pay the price for S3 and to transfer stuff from S3 to CloudFront, and then pay the CloudFront price. Anyway, but S3 is really not designed for CDN scale. Anyway, the Glacier is designed for data that only you are ever going to use. It's basically for storing backups in archives. Like if you wanted to store all the raw video footage for old episodes of LAS, that would make more sense than S3, right? Okay. You'd use Glacier instead of S3.
Okay.
So yeah, it costs 1 cent per gigabyte.
The other big gotcha though is
there's a couple of gotchas.
Yeah. Well, I think the big one is the delay.
Yes. If you want to get a file back, you submit a job and wait for it to be completed. That usually takes between 3 and 4.5 hours. I don't know what the back end of it is that makes that delay make sense, but
you suppose maybe what do you suppose that is? Maybe
I think it's just maybe
offline storage, and they're transferring it back to something to then transfer it to the user, that kind of thing. Like maybe they're moving data around.
Probably partly that, and it's just it costs them a lot less if they don't have to make sure your data that there are at least like 4 replicas of your data facing the internet.
Cached all around the net, yeah.
Right. They just, they make sure there's enough replicas that the data is never destroyed, but if you want the data, they have to copy it over to something kind of like S3 for you to be able to actually access it.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
So basically, they start only on their backup servers or something. I don't know exactly. Again, like we talked about in the pre-show, The problem with the Amazon cloud is it's so opaque. You don't actually know what's going on or what they're doing that makes it make sense for that 4-hour delay.
Yeah, yeah.
The other things are, if you delete a file in less than 90 days, there's a fee for that.
Really?
I think it's 3 cents a gigabyte or something.
I didn't know that catch.
Yeah. So if you're accessing files very frequently, or if you're trying to use it as S3, there are a bunch of extra fees they get you. Like if you download more than 20% of what you store in any 1 month, then you pay 3 cents a gigabyte to retrieve the data, plus the bandwidth fee, which is 12 cents a gigabyte.
Wow.
And that's the same with S3.
Yeah.
So transferring data out of S3 or Glacier is 12 cents. And somebody just pasted it in the chat room there. Glacier is designed with the expectation that retrievals are infrequent and unusual. The data is stored for an extended period of time. You can retrieve, it's up to 5% of your average monthly storage. So not 20%, 5% for free each month. If you try to get more than 5% of your data out in any 1 month, then you're charged a retrieval fee somewhere between 1 and 3 cents per gigabyte.
Okay. So this would be great for
and yes, there's also 3 cents per gigabyte to delete a file if it hasn't been stored for at least 90 days first.
What I like about it is they don't charge anything for the upload to it. And so if I'm designing,
I think S3 is the same or close.
It is now, I think, yeah, Right. So this is good for backup.
Yeah, and it's good for backup, and you only end up paying the bigger fee if you need to restore. So compared to S3 for backup, it's huge savings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
All right. For puts, you're not paying for as much for storage.
Well, and the storage cost is. I mean, at a penny per gigabyte, that's incredibly low. As long as you don't need to get to it very often.
Although it also depends, how much you're storing and what scale and so on. Because in the array I built, if you only consider the price of the drives, which obviously is not all you have to consider when you're building storage server.
Yeah.
But I paid only 5 cents per gigabyte for the drives I just bought.
And that's a one-time.
Yeah.
Except for the ongoing power cost.
I have to, now that's just the price of the drives. I had to buy a server which costs more than all the drives put together.
Right.
And, the power to run that, admin time, so there's significant savings, especially over systems that require a lot of work. So the Glacier has certain specific use cases, although it's probably not great for everything.
Yeah, yeah.
But definitely for some things, it's much more attractive than S3, especially backups.
Yes.
Or archival, if you have to, some tax and legal documents you have to keep for at least 7 years.
And they actually, in their press release, they said that they think it's a great opportunity for media production companies. And I was thinking about it, and I don't need to have the last 6 years of the Linux Action Show sitting on a hard drive here at my house.
Yeah, well, it's one of our clients is TV Ontario, which is a public broadcaster. And when I was at their headquarters 2 weeks ago, they have a data center in the building, which is mostly just filled with storage machines, like NASs and SANs, to store high-def original footage from every show they've ever done.
So this is what I'm thinking, is this could actually, because I'm looking right now, I'm going to try to add another 16 terabytes of storage to the production workflow because I'm out of space. And it's I'm looking at this as a never-ending problem, and I don't really, I'm starting to delete some stuff, but I don't want to have to do that. So I might look at that for this.
Yeah. Although uploading it to them would be a pain, although they have a service where you can send them
a drive for a cost,
Yeah, external drives.
It's nice that they offer that.
Yeah. Well, because, Google's proven with their study a bunch of times that it's still cheaper to FedEx hard drives than it is to upload it over the internet.
All right.
And also a heck of a lot faster.
Why don't we jump to our next roundup story? This one goes down to our friends in Australia. They've passed what's being called a light data retention law, and I guess this is actually better than what was originally proposed. So Australia's parliament has passed a bill that will allow law enforcement agencies to force ISPs to store data on subscribers while an official warrant is sought. So as soon as they decide we're going to go get a warrant, you have to start storing. That's going to be by law. The changes move Australia closer to its 2-year-old proposed plan from the European Convention on Cybercrime. Blah, blah, blah. They were going to go to. Oh, I see. So the original proposal was they were more onerous in what they were going to store, and it was going to be for a couple of years. So
Right. Yeah, because a lot of these laws originally proposed that ISPs keep track of everything you ever do for 3 years on every single customer.
And it was originally without having to get a warrant.
Yes. And then they would, right. So basically, they require ISPs to track everybody all the time, and then the police could get that data without a warrant. Right. Now they're saying the police can ask the ISP to start recording while the police go through the process of getting a warrant, and then the ISP turns the data over once the police have a warrant.
Obviously,
that's
I would
much more fair, but
I would prefer they don't do it at all. But it does seem a little.
That is a lot more fair,
yeah,
and less prone to abuse.
All right, Alan, should we go to the next story?
Well, part of the problem I had with that was, if you're an ISP, how are you going to pay for all this? Like, the example I had is I used to be with a small local ISP that only had one area. Right, they only served like 2 towns, so that's all the customers they were ever going to have, unless they expanded. And how would they afford the infrastructure to store that? Like, if you're Comcast, you have enough money to be able to meet the requirements of such a law.
Still going to be quite the resource demands, though, for them.
Right, but if you're a small company, you're basically going to be put out of business by these data retention laws.
I've often wondered about this.
Offload the cost onto your subscribers.
It seems like a massive burden to a lot of these network operators.
Yeah. Especially when you want them to store, like, if you're talking about everything the person transfers,
that's ridiculous.
Why store a copy of every, that would mean storing every YouTube video everybody watches sepaitely.
Or imagine if somebody like me
watch a YouTube video.
I'm live streaming. I live stream 24/7 from my garage studio.
Yeah. If there was a data retention law that required them to store that, my question is, would you be able to go through the court and subpoena those files because you lost your copy of a recorded episode because Wirecast crashed?
Yeah.
Record everything I'm sending. Can I get access to my files that you were recording without my permission?
It is kind of like my own personal offsite backup service. Good point. All right, Alan, this next roundup story, I believe, goes to you. What is this?
Yes. So this is an article about another piece of financial malware, a man-in-the-browser malware, that uses a self-mutation mechanism to avoid being detected by antivirus apps.
Oh.
So there was an older malware called Cylon, although it's spelled different than the Battlestar Galactica. And basically there's been a revision to it that's now called Tylon.
Yes.
Anyway, it's basically only detected by like 4 of 60 tested antivirus apps so far.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
And at least one of those detects it as a fake or as an admin tool rather than as a virus. So it's basically detecting a behavior rather than the virus itself. And so while it actually detects it, it's not detecting it properly, so it doesn't really count.
So there you go. And information on that, if you want to check to see if your antivirus is in the list or something like that, is a link to that is in the show notes.
Yep.
All right. Sorry, I was just responding to somebody in the chat room.
Yep.
All right,
and
Alan.
The last one here is just a post, like an editorial over at ThreatPost. And it's basically something that we've been talking about a number of times on the show and was kind of underscored by that hack of... what was it, was it Gawker reporter? I forget where he worked.
Oh, yeah. He had worked at Gawker, and I believed at the time he was working at Wired or something like that.
Or had worked at Wired, now works at Gawker or whatever. Anyway,
whatever, yeah.
Basically, they have a post here titled, own their email, own the person. And basically,
that's a good way to put it. It's very true.
Yeah, if you manage to get someone's email, access to their email, then you can own their entire online identity because... my email has things like bank statements, my electric bill gets sent to my email. If you wanted to take over my Twitter account, you can reset the password and it goes to my email. Mm-hmm. And now I have a bunch of separate email accounts, and most of these are on servers I control, and there's no such thing as a password reset mechanism other than me doing it. But it's definitely an attack vector. And in this post, the editor goes on to detail how he got some people to volunteer to let him try to break into their email. And by using information he found out about them on Facebook and so on, he was able to break into a number of different email accounts.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Go get...
So it's definitely an interesting read.
Go get a good secure password on your email accounts, people.
Yes, and use different passwords for everything. And if you have Gmail, you should probably use the two-factor authentication.
Alan, I believe that's bringing us to the end of this week's program, yes?
Yep.
Yes. Now, you can join us, and we invite and encourage you to join us live over at jblive.tv for the video stream or jblive.info for the audio stream. We do that at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is...
4 p.m. Eastern. You know that. You said it earlier.
I still like to do that. That hasn't changed.
2000 UTC.
There's a lot of things that I know better that I still like to do, Alan. Come on.
Yeah. Well, no, you said it earlier, so
I know. It's part of the bit, Alan. It's part of the bit. Okay. Now, if you've enjoyed the TechSNAP program for 72 episodes or even just for one episode, and you would like to directly support us and keep the advertising to a minimum in this show, that way we can keep the content the priority and keep focusing on the stuff you love, I would love to recommend our new Amazon subscription method. We've had a few people take us up on this. I kind of pulled back to see if we got everything worked out. We got the kinks solved, and Amazon Payments is a great way to support the show on a monthly basis. Just go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com. You find a link on the front page, or if you visit the donate page, we also have various dollar amounts. If you'd like to contribute directly, then that goes right into the show, and it keeps these programs on the air. Something like that.
I'm subscribed because I was helping you guys work out why it wasn't working at first.
Yes. Thank you for doing that. Amazon Payments is a little more complicated than PayPal, but we had a lot of people that say, I'd rather not use PayPal.
For your side, which one charges less fees?
I think maybe PayPal, actually, but I'm not positive. The nice thing I like about Amazon is, first of all, I like Amazon better. And I also, they have like this system where you kind of have to have a minimum amount in your account. And one of the problems with PayPal is if people's PayPal account goes to zero, it'll just unsubscribe them. And then, so people sign up and they think they're supporting the show, and then time goes on and their PayPal account runs out and they just unsubscribe and there's no notification for them.
Also, for users, a nice thing is Amazon emails you, I think, a week or two before your subscription comes up every time, and reminds you that they're going to be taking the money so that you don't forget that it's going to take the money on your credit card.
Well, that's very nice too. So I like Amazon. I know a lot of our audience prefers Amazon, so we made that available. PayPal's still there too. PayPal is where the majority of our contributions come from, but I'd like to see that kind of. Plus, it's nice just to kind of not be all your eggs in one basket kind of a thing.
For sure, definitely.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll be right back here next week.